Template 3 shows how to connect Nintex Workflow Cloud to other applications and how to create an approval process for multiple reviewers. This workflow supports the review of any type of document, such as a contract or a business proposal, by creating an online negotiation between two or more reviewers. You can use this template as a starting point for your own document review process, where each document is met with a consistent best practice response. This workflow starts when a new document is added to a box folder named Draft. It then uses a process very similar to Template 1, my first workflow, to send a pre-formatted email to the author confirming that they have started an approval workflow for their document. The workflow then sends a request for review to Reviewer A. Now, if they approve, the workflow shifts to Reviewer B and asks them to review the document. If Reviewer B also approves, the workflow moves the document into an approval folder, sends an email to the author saying congratulations, your document's been approved, and it ends. However, if Reviewer A did not approve the document, the workflow moves the document into a rework folder and sends an email to the author saying, sorry, but you need to revise the document and restart the approval process. Where things really get interesting is when Reviewer A approves, but Reviewer B does not. Now in this scenario, the workflow returns to Reviewer A and asks them to approve the document with Reviewer B's changes. And if they do, it returns to Reviewer B. Now the workflow goes back and forth between the reviewers until they both agree either to send the document back to the author for updates or to go forward and publish the document. And in both cases, the workflow then ends. Well, let's publish this workflow and run it to see how this really works in practice. To start the process, we need to create a box account with 3 folders: Draft, Rework, and Approved. This is where our documents will be stored. This should take you just a couple of minutes. Then in Nintex Workflow Cloud, you need to create a box connection. To do this, you click on Connections, you add New, select Connector, and you'll notice we have a lot of options here. Now let's look at the workflow. So let's configure the start event box. So our connector, box connection for training, and the path we want to start with is Draft. And you'll notice here quickly that we have a couple of variables that we're using. We have path, we have name, and we have created date. But of these, we're really only using the path variable and the name variable in our workflow. And you can tell that because they have the I. The other start event variables have a garbage can next to them showing that you could erase them if you wanted to, but it's a good idea to leave them around. So you never know when you might want to come back and change the way you've set your workflow up. We also have the 2 move a file actions, so let's do those quickly. In this one, this is to move the file to rework if it's not approved. And our source is going to be the path as the location, and then we're going to move it to rework, and then we're going to use the variable name because we don't know what the actual name of the file will be at this point. And we're leaving it set at overwrite because we might want to run this workflow a couple times with the same document. So then we come over here and we adjust the one that's move a file to the approved. Again, we set the connection, path, and now we're setting it to approved, and then the name of the file. And again, we set it to overwrite in case we want to run this a couple times. Now, this is actually a little dangerous here. If you have an overwrite with an approved document, you have the problem that you might approve one version of a document and then overwrite it with a second version. So the question is, why did you have 2 documents with the same title? So this is something you need to consider when you're designing your workflow. Another thing we need to set now is the share file link. Remember, we had the name and the path to the file, but what we didn't have is a link that we could provide to people in the emails. So we're going to set this, and I'm just going to store the view link as initial view link. And we have 2 others of these. We have one in the reject folder. This creates a link to the rejected document. Here's our connection. And our path is going to be work, and then name. And I'm going to save that as final doc view. You notice I'm using a different variable here. I'm using the final view link, so I'm not updating the existing variable. I'm simply using a new one. And we handle the approved the same way. Approved names, final view link. Now, I'm using the same variable here, but That's okay, and the reason is that I only am going to have either approved or rejected out of each time the workflow runs. I'll never have them overwriting. Okay, there's one other thing we need to do before we launch this, and that is we need to set the variable value, the email that we'll be using for authors and reviewers. If this was a real workflow, the email address for the author would probably come from Box, and the reviewer's email might come from some directory or a lookup table, but this is a template, so we simplify things a bit. I'll use training@nintex.com for the email. You'll probably want to use your own email here. And if we zoom back out, you'll see that all the workflow actions are configured, so we're ready to select Publish from the toolbar to publish the workflow. Now, I have an option here to change the name and description of the workflow, but I'm going to stay with the version. We also have the option to select Production or Development. Now, we're going to select Development, as that keeps this workflow from counting against our license, and it also adds a development flag to any emails or websites that show. This will keep people from acting on any emails or guidance that they get from this workflow should something get loose during our testing. Now let's test the workflow. We're going to start with this very simple text document, as we want to be able to easily track any editing during our document approval process. So let's start the workflow. We'll just copy this document. So there's our document. Let's go back to workflow so we can track where we are. We've now kicked off the workflow. It's set a variable for the value of the email. It's created a share link, and it should have sent us this email to tell us that the workflow has started. So here's the first email from the workflow, from an action called Send an Email Workflow Started, right there. This type of announcement is very important for business critical workflows where the originator may not get a response for a couple of hours or even days. Now imagine if this document was a sales contract that had been submitted during the last week in the quarter. Well, how long do you think the seller is going to wait for feedback from the workflow saying that something happened? In the worst case, they'll decide that nothing's happening. They'll drag 3 more copies of that contract in the draft folder before giving up and hand walking a copy over to the reviewer. Well, now you've got 5 approval workflows, 4 automatic and 1 manual, all competing for the reviewer's attention. Now, by immediately replying to users with an email like this, you can set their expectations and you can give them the confidence that dropping a file into the draft folder has actually started a workflow process. And you see that here. Author, by placing this document, here's the name of our document, by the way, into the Box folder draft, you started a review. And we've given them a link here so that they can go and look at the document to make sure that it's the right one. And we've also added a next step so they know ahead of time what the expectations should be for our workflow. Now the next step in this workflow, here, reviewer A, they're sent an email asking them to approve the document. Well, let's pull that out and take a look. And here's that document. Now let's take a moment to unpack this email. And let me open this Express Approval so that we can compare. So here we are. Here's the email that we set as a variable. Here's our for development use only sticker, so people understand this is just a prototype. And here's our text, Reviewer A. This is a request to approve the document. And you can see name here, and there's the name there. Now you can view and edit the document here. This is that link we created from the share link action. And again, we're giving them next steps, so we're setting expectations. We've also added some text to this email to help you keep track of the workflow and to learn more about how to use this workflow. So let's scroll down a touch. First, we have some best practices on how to send emails from workflows. And then we have information on how to track which workflow, here, and which action, here, created this workflow. Now this is really important when you have more than one workflow running. You need to be able to tell which email came from the workflow that you're testing and which came from an earlier version or maybe an entirely different workflow altogether. Now you probably want to do something similar to this as you develop your own workflows. And we also list what communications to expect depending on what happens to this reply. So we note here that if you select approve, it will go to reviewer B. If you select reject, you'll send an email to the author. That way, as you test your workflow, you know what to expect next depending on your action. And finally, we have some related information links where you can find more information about this workflow trial. We have a link to the product documentation where you can find detailed guidance on how to use and extend this workflow. You'll also find guidance here on how best to use the many available options in your workflows. And we have a link to the page that's playing this video so that you can get back to it later. And also you can use the links that go to a lot of very useful sites. And finally, we have a link to the Nintex Workflow Cloud community, where you can share ideas with other users, get guidance from experts, and see what's new at Nintex. And as we said at the bottom, we have our opportunity to select Reject or Approve. Well, to show you how this works, I'm going to go back up. I'm going to view and edit the document here. And here's our document. Viewed in box. You can see template 3 test document. This is the original text. Now, I'm going to edit this. Now, you'll need to download the box apps to make this happen. And here it is. So now we'll add a note. Then we'll save it, close the document. And as we said at the bottom, we have our opportunity to select Reject or Approve. So I am going to reply with Approve. So we replied Approve. We changed that to the Reviewer B, and now we're in Reviewer B's request for approval, and here we are. Dear Reviewer B, do you agree with Reviewer A that the document, and there's our document, is ready to publish? And we can review the document here. And again, you'll note that we're showing them what will happen depending on what decision they make. So we go to review the document. Here we are. Let's do a couple of changes. We'll save, close. Now, Reviewer B could reject, and they could send this back and forth between A and B for quite a while, but I'm going to keep this simple and select Approve. And here's the email to our author. Author, your document, template test, was approved for publication, has been moved to the folder. Now, something to notice here. On this email, we did this a little differently. We actually have the link printed out rather than saying move here. So I wanted you to see how that would actually look and see how that it's much cleaner if you have a keyword rather than an entire link. So we click this again to see where we are. One thing that's very important to notice, we're now in a new folder. We're in Approved. And here's our document. The original section changes from Reviewer A, changes from Reviewer B. So let's go back and look at what we did. So our path, we started at the start event. We sent an email to the author saying that we started the workflow. We sent one to Reviewer A. They approved, so we sent it to Reviewer B. They approved, so we moved the file to Approved. Then we set up our link and we sent an email saying that the document had been approved. And at that point, we exited the workflow. So this is how the workflow works right out of the box. But there's a problem with this, and that is that the author is not included. You notice Reviewer A and Reviewer B could edit the document, but the author couldn't. They had to go off, clean up the document, reload it to the draft folder, and restart the entire process. We'd be much cleaner if we simply added the author. Well, we can do this really quickly. In fact, it'll take about 4 minutes here. So first, we add an extra branch to this. Now, you see here's our third branch. Something important to note, the order that they appear in the form is not important. What is important is the order in which the branch by stage is driven. First thing to do, let's go in though and rename this. So branch 3 now becomes author. Now I could build this by dragging in an express approval and then dragging in, say, a send email or maybe a change state. But that's a really slow process. There's a much quicker way to do this. So let me delete this. And let's do this in a much simpler format. I'm simply going to take Reviewer A and I'm going to copy him and paste Reviewer A in. What we do, change this to author. Okay, let's go in and configure this a second. So we've got to change a couple things. I'll do this quickly. please update your document name based on the red lines. You can view and edit the document here. Okay. And then we'll just say, hey, if you do this request for approval, we'll go back to reviewer A. And then we'll leave it so that if they reject it, it will go to the rework folder. So we still want this to happen. So what we're saying is that if the author decides it's not worth fixing, we move the file to rework, we send the link, and we send them a note telling them that their document was rejected and that this whole system's over. Great, perfect. Now, once they've edited the document, if they then reply approve, we're going to change this. We actually want it to go back to reviewer A. And this is an easy fix. We simply go up here, set next stage, and we move it to reviewer A. Great. So now if they fix the document, they reply approve, it goes to A, the entire process starts over. So we need to go back here to A, and we need to make a couple changes. We're not going to change the approval process because we still want it to go to reviewer B. And we're not going to touch reviewer B at all, you notice here. If they reject, it comes back to A because we want these two reviewers to sort it out together. It's only when reviewer A rejects that we want it to go to the author, but that means we have to make a couple changes. So we no longer want it to move to rework. Only the author does that. We don't want to create this. We don't even want to send an email because remember, we're sending an express approval request. What we do want to do is change where it goes, change state to author. And then we'll configure this, change our state from exit to author. So there's our workflow. Let's back out just a little bit and take another look at this. Let's assume that we have to do one review by everybody. So we start when the author puts his document in the box folder. We then share the link and we send an email saying the workflow is started. Remember, we're letting them know something is going to happen so they don't keep clicking a submit button or start running copies around. We then send it to reviewer A. If reviewer A says they approve, we change state, we send it to reviewer B. If reviewer B says reject, it comes back to A. If reviewer A looks at that change from B and says, yeah, he's right, that's a really good point, I need the author to rewrite it, they reject also, and it goes over to the author. Again, remember, location left to right doesn't matter. It's where the change state action sends us. The author looks at it, and let's say they like the changes, so they do a little tweaking on the wording, they fix it, they send approve, it comes back to A likes it, they approve, it goes to B likes it, they approve. Now, we move the file to the approved folder, create a link to that, and we send an email to the author saying your document is completely approved. Find it here in the approved folder. We exit and we end the workflow. And that's how our improved system works. Now, the detailed steps that will walk you through everything we just did are available in the product documentation. Just follow the link below this video. And please visit the Nintex Exchange for additional templates that will help you get started with a wide range of workflow scenarios.